Cool. Um, Seeds made possible the spread of plants from the prehistoric bogs and swamps to the drier land, to plains and mountains that had never supported vegetation of any kind. And the woody vegetation produced by some of these seeds had more chance of survival in a land environment, since what was required was a combination of rigidity, longevity, and the ability to attain sufficient height to outreach the competitive growth. One of the earliest seed plants was the cycad, a palm-like tree with fleshy seeds and large fern-like leaves, still seen in tropical forests. It was one of the most abundant plants in the landscapes 200 million years ago, but was gradually replaced by another type of seed plant whose descendants are among the most familiar on Earth today, the conifers. Yeah, I'll show you the cycad. This is the plant growing. You can see it's the everything is inside the plant. So it just has to unfold and unfold. And this is the cycad. Tick, 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 tick. So you actually see it for real these days. Yeah. Breaking through the relatively low seed ferns and cycads at about the same time, the first warm-blooded mammals appeared. The conifers became for millions of years the dominant trees on the planet. Their seeds, contained in distinctive cones, enable them to dominate the environment and overshadow the spore plants and to spread into habitats where there had been no previous growth. Ting, 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 ting. These are the conifers, the needle ones. So the Christmas tree is a conifer, right? Right, I think so, yeah. And these are, I think, Vedas. Um, yeah, they're also quite pretty. You can see they're all needle-like. Yeah. So the seeds contained in distinctive cones enable them to dominate the environment and overshadow the spore plants and to spread into habitats where there had been no previous growth. Today's descendants of those ancient conifer forests, pines, spruces, firs, larches, cedars, cypresses, and junipers, include some of our tallest trees and the oldest living plants. They cover great stretches of the non-temperate zone, including high mountain ranges. They are hmm, they are our most productive timber trees, supplying three-fourths of the lumber used by people and nearly all the pulpwood used for paper products. But they benefit few. Actually, it's for US because in India the conifers are restricted only to the Himalayan belt, from like Kashmir till the northeast. But they benefit few other kinds of life, providing no food for people and little for birds and animals. Prevalent as they have been fighting for millions of years now, a losing battle with yet another type of tree, the one that is at present the culmination of plant life on Earth, the flowering tree. Ta-da, ta-da, ta-da. This one, actually, it's like kind that you can see everywhere. The flowering tree. Ting, 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 ting. Acha, anybody has questions? You can always ask, or you can even put in the chat. Um, this plant, whose multitude of forms are so familiar to us today, was a broad-leaved organism that provided flowers, fruit, leaves, and finally lumber, and an extraordinary variety of wood products. The first flowering trees whose covered seeds represented a major advance over the naked seeds of the conifer made their appearance when dinosaurs arranged the land, and they provided new forms of food for herbivores of all types. Eventually these flowering plants grew almost everywhere that life could exist, and the form of trees, shrubs, grasses, and herbs, they now supply virtually all the food on which humans depend. As a result of rich profusion of life generated by the flowering plants, the Earth's flora by 60 million years ago was striking similar to today's, with flowering forests and grasslands spreading across the land, pushing back the conifers and other forms of plant life in an evolutionary struggle that still goes on. Right? You can see, you can imagine the scale, the massive scale in which these battles are fought and won, right? So when the Sagaras, they fought their battle. There was a time when they dominated over everything, and the ferns kind of like reduced, and then you had conifers, and they became everything, and then you had broadleafers, and then they became everything. And we are still witnessing. We are in a space where we can see all these four stages of evolution in the current context. Yeah, amazing. Today's flora represents billions of years of evolving that may be easier to comprehend if viewed as just one week. Just after midnight on Sunday, when our telescope sequence begins, the first microscopic organism emerges in the sea, and from then until 6 a.m. on the following Saturday, they combine and expand until the ocean is full of primitive plant life. Not until 10 p.m. on Saturday, in our capsule version of time, do the first plants take their tentative steps onto the land. Then the process begins to accelerate. By 3 a.m. on Sunday, the great seed ferns and cycads cover the earth in a forest that formed great coal beds. At 10:30 on Sunday night, the flowering plants emerge and begin to dominate the landscape. Finally, less than 3 minutes before midnight on Sunday, the evolutionary force that has had more effect on plant life than any other in the long history of the world appears on the scene. Humans. Chapter 2: Seeds of Life. If you think of seed as a box or container with a miniature plant inside, it is easy to understand why those first seed trees outstripped other forms of plant life not so well equipped. The spore plant requires the presence of moisture before it can reproduce. The spore grows into a tiny green plant upon which sex organs appear, but only with water in the form of rain or dew can the male cell swim to fertilize the female egg. Thus, moisture must be available at precisely the right time for reproduction to occur, leaving a great deal to chance. Inside the container of the seed, by contrast, the embryo plant already exists, with a root, a trunk, and one or two leaves. Not only is it ready to start growing the moment conditions are favorable, but within the seed are cells containing food reserves of protein, starch, and oil to support the baby plant until it roots itself and begin to draw nourishment from its environment. An extreme example of the amount of food that seeds store for the plant is the palm coconut. It's a big shell containing enough food to nourish a young palm tree with leaves up to a foot in length. In summer, a seed forms on the branch of a tree, drops off, and is then blown or carried away by animal or bird some distance from the parent tree, where it lies dormant through the winter. Ta-da, ta-da, ta-da. Yes. So this is no, this will come later. Uh, yeah. So this also you see like this. This is like wind pollinated. Ting ting ting. So this one just like flies away. Tarang tarang tarang. And yeah, it's like it's one of you eating a mango, and this is animal dispersal. So like how a tree spreads its fruits, the term we use is called dispersal vector, right? And it could be the four major strata. It's by the wind, which we see in the famous dandelion, which is quite popular, which you see over here. Expulsion. A lot of them just blast up and put 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 put. If you're familiar, some of them, even the sound comes during the summers when they explode, especially in the dry deciduous forests. It's quite common, which is quite dominant in India. By animals when we eat it, uh, we can move around a lot of seeds. You would see like a lot of tomato growers in the compost that comes from places, because the seeds they pass through that animal into the dung, into the compost, and then they come. and then the water is a dispersal medium. So Arjun trees, for example, they drop their seeds, the seeds float in the water, and then they find new colonies. Coconut is almost the best example out there. So these are the seed dispersal vectors. Tung, 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 tung. Hmm. With the coming of spring, the soil begins to grow warmer, rain softens the ground, adding to the moisture already present from the melting snows, and a change begins to take place within the seeds. The cells of the embryo plants starts to divide, the shell or container cracks open, and the root emerges into its new environment. First the root finds its way out of the seed, and as if by instinct, seeks the ground. The hard tip at the end of the root shoot wriggles into the earth, aided by a combined push from expanding, dividing cells in the growing plant. Once the root has made its way into the earth, the rest of the plant takes the shape of an arch. The trunk of the plant is bent like a horseshoe, while the top still remains embedded in the seed container, reinforcing the upward thrust of the young tree by actually pushing with two legs instead of one, right? So basically, if you can see over here, you know, when the seed is cracking open, the first thing that comes out is the root. The shoot is not even developing right now. And then the root goes, and this is like the horseshoe it was talking about. Tuck, 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 tuck. Okay, and slowly, it starts pulling it over. It starts pulling up the seed super, it starts raising it, and then you see it raises tung tung tung, and then it starts opening up the leaves, and then the shoot goes up, right? So it's not happening simultaneously. It's just the roots are first anchoring themselves, and then they are like trying to make the plant stand, and then it opens up. Magic, right? Yeah, even I didn't know that. When the arch has sprung and the plant stands straight, naked in its new environment, the unneeded shell drops off and the tip of the plant begins to grow upward toward the sun, while the branches or roots below the surface reach out in search of moisture. As the inner cells of the plant are affected by different intensities and directions of sunlight, certain chemical reactions take place and the plant begins to grow upward in a spiraling or irregular motion. Tree's life has begun. Reproduction. Perhaps nothing illustrates the tree's ability to adapt to environmental circumstances quite so well as the ingenuity with which they scatter their seeds in order to reproduce. Some seeds simply fall to the ground, some float on the water to find a place to germinate, others are fired like buckshot over surprising distances from the parent tree. Seeds are enclosed in nuts. Seeds are enclosed in nuts or fleshy fruits to be carried away by animals and birds. They are concealed within burdocks or sticky seed pods that attach to an animal's fur. They sail through the air on wings propelled by the winds. So even in the animal dispersal, sometimes there's a compound dispersal where two mediums are used. For example, this little seed. No, no. Oh yeah, this one. So basically, this is owl chick, um, which ate a mouse, right? So you can see the fur of the mouse, but the mouse ate the seeds of certain plant, and this tree grows when the mouse eats the trees, and then the birds eat the mouse, and then goes far, far away, and then shits. So in a way, with this double range, it has double the range that the tree can spread its offspring and can be taken further. And the seed was intact throughout the guts of the mouse, and then further throughout the guts of the owl. So these things get compounded, so it's quite fun. Yeah. Mm. Yeah, so they fly. You can see that silk cotton tree. When it opens up the pods, it's just like silky, 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 just like it just goes everywhere. Um, so yeah, that's pollination. So they all have different vectors based upon where they are. If they're close to the sea or close to the rivers, then they'll have more seed infertility. If they're in places where very high density, right? Very high density of forest. It's very dense. So what will happen in those places for any seed that actually uh, takes uh, takes ground, it has to have a lot more store of energy. Mm, yeah. So in a very dense forest, maybe there's a lot of mulch over here in this place, because a lot of like old leaves have like just gathered up because there's just so many trees. So, your baby plant would not be able to produce food right away after sprouting from the seeds. It has to make sure that it leaves reaches the sunlight, at least a little bit of it. So in very dense forests, it needs more food to push itself up. So the seed sizes become bigger. So when the seed sizes become bigger, then using wind as a seed dispersal is not a great idea, and that's when they revert to animals because that's like that really works for them. But in places where they have to colonize, where the forests are not dense, and they have to colonize spaces which are not dense, then they can just scatter their seeds with the wings on them because heavy seeds can't fly on the wings, but the light ones can. But they can only grow in places where there is like sunlight is present the moment the seed sets on into the soil. So it just depends upon what the conditions are, and that's how they have attuned themselves to different dispersal vector. Nice. Am I audible and little clear?
Yep.
Perfect. Yeah. So yeah. So whatever the means of transport or the size and the shape of the seed container, the seed within has the same basic form and purpose. It is the fertilized egg of a new tree, seeking a place to take root in the fresh ground to perpetuate the species. Seeds develop from flowers whose stamens and pistils produce the sperm, or male cells, and the eggs, or female cells. Right? The sperms are the stamens and pistils, which are the male cells, and the eggs are the ovules or the female cells. When these are united, a seed is formed. Depending upon the plant from which it comes, the seed may range in size all the way from the tiny, powder-like speck of rhododendron to the black walnut, or even to the huge palm coconut. Right. So one of the reasons why also palm coconut is like so big is because it's on those sandy beaches. It's very hard for them to find nutrient on the surface. So it has to like the roots have to go really really deep um to be able to anchor themselves and find a lot of nutrition and freshwater sources. So that's why it has massive. Um, they have an almost infinite variety of shapes and colors and other characteristics. Yet, there are in fact only two different types of seeds, gymnosperms and angiosperms. Gymnosperms, first and older of the seed-bearing trees, are the conifers typified by such species as the pine and spruce, which make up as much as a third of all the world's forested areas. These trees produce seeds in their cones, which is simply a concentration of scales bearing ovules that become seeds when the cone ripens. They're known as gymnosperms, from the Greek words meaning naked seeds, because they have no outer case or protective covering. In order for fertilization to occur, pollen is produced in the male flowers, and in the spring of the year, these tiny sperm cells are released to be carried by wind into contact with egg cells in receptive female flowers or cones. Right. So I'll show you how it looks like. Um, Here it is. So this is a pine cone. So conifers are usually like needle shaped. So you can see the broadleaf forests are the ones with like broadleaves, like people, burger, mango, almost a lot of things we are familiar, because now they have completely won the fight in the warmer places. In the temperates, the conifers are still able. In the colder regions, the conifers are still able to hold this way. So yeah, so these are the pine cones. So what happens is that so this one is opened up. You can see it has released its seeds already. So the pine cone, it's so the male, so they'll be the male pine cone. They'll just like open up and just completely bombard the air with their pollens, and there's just so many of them. And the wind they blow, and then they'll try to like sneak into the female cones and then fertilize the seeds inside the cones. So the seeds are constantly protected, and when the seeds are developed, they develop something like this. And when they're ready, and then and the cones can like really hold on to these seeds for a really really long time. And when it's the thing that because everything is favorable, the world is perfect, could not have been more romantic, the rain is around the corner, they'll open, or even sometimes after like a forest fire, because after a forest fire they know that a lot of species either have been burned or been like suffered massive trauma, and their their sapling could be able to make benefit of this and be able to spring forth much faster. So a lot of time during the forest fire, all these seeds will like open up and then they'll fly. Yeah. So and then they fly and then they find new spaces. As simple as that. जीवन के सफर में राहें मिलते हैं बिछड़ जाने को और रह जा. Exactly. So, when the cone ripens, its scales loosen or open, and the naked seeds fall to the ground. Although this method of reproduction represented a great evolutionary improvement over the older, more primitive spore plants, it is nonetheless a chancy process, one so profligate that the water of a pond in a pine forest is covered with a film of billions of pollen grains at the time the trees flower. Right. And sometimes what happens that they've just like pumped up all their energy and they're ready to flower, and then they go like flower and then it rains. And if that happens, no fertilization will be able to happen because they're completely wind pollinated. They need dry things. Even if the humidity goes up, these seeds will start setting down much faster. So, and then they have to have that chance that there are good enough trees of the conifers. That's why you'll always see them in massive strands. You won't see them much in single individuals, because then it has to have a critical mass of number for them. All those spores to fly, all those powders to then get attached to the females, and all that sex to happen. So it's like a lot of energy goes into it. The other type of seed which resulted from the tree's evolutionary development of a more orderly and more certain method of reproduction is the angiosperm, from the Greek words meaning seeds in a container. We have already seen that the first flowering plants began to emerge some 60 million years ago, since which time they have proliferated, adding to the world a rich bounty of flowers and fruits, and inexorably pushing back the great coniferous forest. No one knows how the first flowering trees evolved, but botanists imagine that at some remote time, insects discovered that the sap exuded by ovules or eggs in the female portion of seeds would make a tasty meal when mixed with the male pollen. As the insects returned again and again to this source of food, they stimulated a more systematic form of reproduction than the ones that are dependent solely upon the vagaries of the winds. But at the same time, the insects doubtless bit into many of the eggs, destroying them and preventing reproduction. Right. So what happened was that some of the insects they figured, oh my God, if we go to these males, and pick some of those pollens and then mix it with the female egg, which you know, which at that time was still happening from air pollination, with wind pollination. But then they'll eat a little bit of this, and then when they'll come, they'll eat a little bit of that, that would mix those things more effectively than the air could have done. So, so plants started offering them more incentive to keep doing it because they realize it's more efficient. So because they realize that sometimes when they're trying to do this, they eat the entire egg. So they started forming like more. Um, they started forming like hard shells around the seeds and started creating a new way in which we could they could receive those pollens and still keep the egg intact. We'll see how that happens up ahead. As the first angiosperm plants spread inland onto dry ground, the insects followed their food supply. In pursuit of them came the reptiles that fed on insects. Eventually, the reptiles discovered they could substitute plants for insects in their diet, and they grew larger as they browsed among more available and reliable sources of green food. Plants that had come to rely on insects for pollination devised new methods of attracting them. The reproductive organs were surrounded by bright, showy foliage that could be seen from a distance. Flowers developed, and with the passage of time, certain plants evolved techniques of attracting particular animal. The purpose was to ensure that the regular pollinators, animals that would best serve the plant, not chance visitors that traded its pollen and nectar, would be most likely to revisit it. Flowers that are fertilized by bees, for instance, are hardly ever red, since most bees have difficulty seeing this color. Right, so ting, 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 ting. See, never red. It'll be white, it'll be blue, it'll be purple, it'll be yellow, pink, but never red. Can't see red. Yeah. Um, yeah. So over here also you can see that they started moving, started trying to design themselves to attract certain kind of insects and animals that do not depend upon the seeds as a food because that was damaging for them. So the motion of certain flowers in the wind apparently attracts some animal pollinators, while other flowers display a patterns of colors, dots, or lines that converge at the entrance to the food supply to lead the insect to it. Yeah, imagine like this, Kanchinar. It actually has like like lines which are like pointing this way, this way, this way, and then this is where you find the food. So to direct, it's like there's a landing pad, and then there's like the directing it inside and go straight the insect where it has to. Nice. Any questions? Anything you guys would like to ask? Any curiosity?
Yeah, I just want to know one thing.
Uh-huh.
So, are these methods still evolving? Like, are they evolving with more and more methods of attracting insects or bees?
Yeah, but it's just that in trees, the process is much slower. So uh, yeah, I wouldn't like. I think we wouldn't be able to notice the change that easily. And maybe they are still evolving and they're changing um, their methods. I don't really know. But if you have examples you would like to share, that'll be like awesome.
Yeah, okay, got it. Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. And these things have really happened very subtly. Um, Yeah, but if you see in the environmental time scale, the amount of time it took from the ferns to cycads was huge, and from there to conifers was again it was big, but conifers to flower like flowering species are actually quite new in our systems. And I think you'll find certain trees, their different varieties have different, like very small differences in flowers, right? So in certain varieties of the same species, you'll see the flowers are deeper in the sense they're longer. So they are adapting more for preference toward birds because maybe in that area the birds. So maybe in that area, birds are being more are performing better as pollinators. And then the same variety you can see a different variety with like a little shorter things. And but probably over there, it's animals are more active uh, as pollinators. So these are again the traits that keep changing, right? You can see the certain varieties are of different colors, right? Certain varieties of the same species is yellow, while certain are white, based upon what are the preferred pollinators of that area. If it's yellow, that means they're more dependent on probably the bees for pollination. If it's white, then maybe they are more dependent upon the nighttime insects. That could be the moths, right? Um, yeah. So these shifts you can see in the varieties uh, of the same species. Yeah.
Right,
So
right. Got it. Yes.
nice, no? So yeah. So must be these changes are much more um, recent, and I think because they haven't completely diverged away into different species. So next time you get to see it, take a note of it and share with us all. Great. More questions if anyone else has some curiosity that has been triggered so far. Fine, मेरा क्या जाता है? I'll continue then. Um, yeah, with the development of flowering plants, a whole new world of wildlife grew and enlarged. An expanding complex of birds and animals and insects that depended upon the gathering of nectar and that pollinated other plants as the side effects of their unending quest for food. So basically, they train the insects and the animals and the birds to pollinate them, which is much more effective than the wind. So you can see how they have played a big role in the evolution of the things. Because in the end, trees are the sole primary producer of food. They're the only ones because the only form of energy in our universe, in our world, is sun. That's the only energy out there, and the trees are the only ones that can convert that into glucose and other food. And that food is then everybody else needs. Everybody else is the secondary consumer. So yeah, like our life has just evolved around food so much. Yeah, and maybe, um, yeah, you know, maybe mango has played a big role in our evolution because when I see my family eating mango, yeah, I know why we have four fingers and five and one thumb. Um, Even I'm a big fan of mangoes, but not as much as my family. They love it. Yeah, we used to have like bagan. Okay, fine. Um, the yeah. Um, in the case of certain plants, such as the cherry and apple trees, animals consume the fruit, and the seed passed unharmed through the alimentary canal to be deposited far from the plant of origin. Small animals that fed on the forest abundance became the prey of carnivores and thus part of the food chain, the vitally important system by which matter from soil and air passes through plants and animals and back to the soil and air. It is this system upon which all life depends. In their urge for survival, the seed-bearing trees hit upon countless different devices for carrying pollens from one flower to another. But essentially, the methods fall into two main categories. The first is wind pollination, which requires the presence of light, small, dry pollen grains, easily shaken from the stamens or male flowers. To receive the tiny bits of pollen that are blown about by the wind, the stigmata of flowers must be long, or feathery, or sticky, or so constructed as to trap the fine dust. All conifers are pointed this way, as are the poplar, ash, birch, oak, beech, and certain other species. Right. So I'll show you how it feels like this, wind pollination. So you can see over here it's like the trap, right? And then the male flowers is usually so full of 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 pollens that when the wind comes, or sometimes when you just hit them with a stick or with your hand, it just goes patch 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 patch, poultry everywhere, and then the females are there to catch them. Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, but since this method is so haphazard, a disproportionately high percentage of pollen is wasted, and these trees must produce immense quantities of pollen in order that even a tiny amount will be effective. Scientists have estimated that a single stamen of a beech tree, for example, may yield 2,000 grains, while the branch system of a vigorous young birch can produce 100 million grains a year. That's so much work. One pine or spruce cone alone releases between 1 and 2 million grains of pollen into the air. In Sweden, which is covered with spruce forest, an estimated 75,000 tons of pollen are blown from the trees each year. Most of these pollen grains, which appear to the naked eye like minute particles of dust, fall to earth to become part of the humus accumulating on the floor of the forest. And because the outer wall of the grain is so durable, scientists study the contents of ancient peat bogs or the layers of mud beneath an old lake, often find pollen grains intact many millennia after they fell from the trees. The steady rain of pollen sank to the bottom of the lake each year, one layer piling up on top of another to form strata. In a bog of this type, the botanist can make a boring with a special cylinder and bring up from the bottom a core that contains samples from each layer. By examining them, he can discover the nature of the vegetation, the changes in forest types, and the variations in climatic conditions that took place long before the advent of recorded history. A far more sophisticated method of pollination than that of broadcasting it on the winds is the one in which the plant compensates for its own lack of mobility by having animals work for it. As a general rule, the plants that rely on this technique have found a way to supply the animal with food and warmth and protection, while it collects pollen and nectar, and the pollen is located where some portion of the animal's body will rub against it. We know that certain animals are capable of communicating to others of their kind the existence of a food source. Bees, for example, that have been out searching for nectar, return to the hive and fly or dance in such a way as to indicate the direction, distance, and richness of food. And at times, the lure of shelter is as important to an insect as the attraction of food. Typically, animal pollinated flowers have attractive petals, scent, and nectar. They're generally conspicuous and have many seeded fruits. By contrast, the wind-pollinated plants usually have flowers that are small and inconspicuous. They have numerous hanging male catkins from which the pollen is easily shaken or blown. The wind-pollinated trees, of which the willow and alder are typical, flower in the early spring before the new leaves come out and before insects are on the wing, so that they can shed their pollen before the emerging foliage can prevent its flight. So it's a very interesting concept for our dry deciduous forest, because if you would have noticed, if you understand, almost all our native species in the dry deciduous belt, which runs from all the way, from your thorny scrublands in the north in Punjab, all the way south till Tamil Nadu, and in the east like Jharkhand, Bihar, and in the west to Gujarat and Maharashtra. So our dominant forests of India are the dry deciduous forest, and except for like little sections, but then they are also mostly deciduous in form. So what happens is that they shed their leaves, most of them from between anytime between like Jan to March or April, right? So depending upon how much it's able to survive with the water that fell during the monsoon. And then, all the trees go bare and naked. And then, they'll wait. And by March or April, they'll start flowering. And at that time, if you see our forests, they're the most beautiful time to see because there are no leaves and just the flowers. And because these flowers, they're just like so strikingly out there, it's very easy and efficient for the insects to fertilize them because they can see them so clearly. And that's why we have this one of the smartest forests anywhere, you know, and that's how resource efficient they are. Because this is the time because as long as they have leaves, they'll keep transpiring, they'll keep evaporating the water out there. So in the time of the water stress, which starts post winter in India, you'll see in the very cold places, your dry deciduous forests are the one who shed the leaves in winter, early winter, like in the autumn. For us, autumn does not come like that. For us, majority of India, the autumn comes in like Jan, it's like comes in the middle of the winter. Um, yeah, very pretty it looks. So entire forest like alive with orange and red and yellow and all sorts of flowers. And then, as the pollination stage gets over, the fruits and the new leaves, they start coming together. And then, it times itself so well that it's just in time for the seed to be ready by the time the monsoon hits it. And then it lets it go. And that's how the seeds also have the highest chance of growing. So that's the for those who joined late, we are reading the book called The Secret Life of the Forest by Richard M. Ketchum, who's been a great journalist and historian and who decided to write about forest. And he's just like us. He doesn't have an academic or technical background. That's why I enjoy reading his book. And that kind of ends the session for today. So we can have a round of applause. Okay, fine. Yeah, I know it's Sunday. So yeah, so that's that's life. That's about the forest. And yeah, maybe so you can see this is the teak. I think I'm and even the seeds are so like remember when we're talking about the evolution from the the angiosperms to gymnosperms or gymnosperm transfer the naked seeds to the fruit bearing seeds, right? So the fruit bearing seeds, the the thing is that they come with the storage of food and they can be dormant for a very very long time. And you can see these are the teak seeds and this is the inside pulp. And they come with a trigger, waiting for the right kind of environment. It's not that the moment it'll just rain, they'll start germinating. For example, if you want to manually artificially germinate the teak seed, you'll have to go through certain processes of trying to mimic the kind of triggers that would be required in a natural environment before the tree thinks that it's time to like pop out of my seed shell and embrace the life, right? So you repeatedly drench these seeds for 12 hours in water and then dry them in the shade for 12 hours and then drench them for 12 hours and dry them in the shade for 12 hours. And this process goes on for like 12, 14 to like up to like to like a month or 25 days. And after that, it starts germinating and starts opening up, right? There are certain seeds that only grow in ashes. They won't germinate unless there is like ash over there. So they've really probably evolved themselves to make the best of forest fires. So when we're trying to raise them, crack them up in our nursery, then we'll try to mimic. We put them in the ash, and then we'll let them germinate over there. So yeah, those are the interesting triggers. Any questions, my friends? Anything you guys would like to share? Or if you would like to tell me about how the session was, what you found useful, what could have been better, what more you would like to listen to in the future. Ash, for like in the mountains, we have the this thing called anyar. So we need ash for that. They only germinate. Uh, yeah, only in the ashes. I'm not really aware of the plains, may like the examples in the plains, because not really worked with seeds over here. But the same trick does not work for everyone. So a lot of people who are into nurseries or especially into seed germination, for them it's like some people it's a lifelong pursuit to be able to germinate certain species. And you try all sorts of things. It's just like trying to raise the perfect child. Sometimes you'll put it into Jivamrit, sometimes you'll try to alternative wet and dry, sometimes you'll try to do it like you try to feed it to animals and make them shit it out. There's certain lot of trees which only grow when elephants eat them and shit them out. If somebody else eats them, they won't grow. If you just plant them like that, they won't grow. So then if you want to like germinate those things artificially, then you'll try to go around collecting elephant shit and then trying to do some magic with it. Maybe make a concoction out of it and then try your best. Any more response or feedback? Or any questions in general about forest? Or would you like to close the session?
Thank you for the session. Actually, this week, I think we should have studied this in botany in school, but it's never taught this interesting way there. So it was good learning. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Yeah. And maybe because I'm not a trained botanist, so I don't have a lot of understanding how things actually technically work. I'm more self-taught in these things. So there might be times when I may say something which actually is not true, but that's my sense of things. So if you ever feel like there's something, you can always let me know, and I'll try to fix it, and that's how we learn and we share.
Sure, sure.
And do Miyawaki forest require charcoal for the carbon element? Um, yeah, you don't really need charcoal as such. You can add bit of like compost, a lot of compost, to provide that boost in organic carbon. You can do, you can put some husk. You can put some charcoal also. I think it helps with water retention. Yeah, so all those things can be done. Everything is possible. Yeah, cool. So I'll see you guys in a couple of weeks to come. Maybe we'll do it. We'll try to do it every other Sunday if possible. And if you guys have any ideas for the next session, just feel free to like share it with the group. You can share it with me, Bombil, Vijay is also here, or you can just put it in one of the groups and we'll pick it up and we'll talk about it. If there's any certain idea that you would like to talk. And if it's not there, then we'll find a new book, a new chapter, and then we'll take it forward. Thank you, everyone.